Here on The Colour of Country Life, great to catch up with Michael Whitehead. He is the Head of Agribusiness Insights at the ANZ. Michael, thanks for joining us today on Flow.
Thanks very much, Ricky.
It's been an absolute rollercoaster year for our farmers, and you're looking ahead to 2023, a comprehensive analysis offered by ANZ Agribusiness. What are your main takeaways?
Look, absolutely. And 2023, well, for those of us who've been in agri for years, it's always an interesting year. 2023, we've got to be honest, may have slightly more challenges than the last couple of years, and particularly the post-drought years. But things are still looking pretty good as well. What are we looking ahead to? We're looking ahead to the fact that the very peak of a lot of prices may now be past us, whether that's in grain, whether that's in livestock, but things look like they're still going to remain pretty good. And we're also looking at the fact that some of the things which have impacted agri around the country, particularly the recent rain, which has impacted grain producers in New South Wales and Victoria mostly, will have flow-on effects. And the last, I suppose a lot of things we'll look at, but another big one's obviously going to be geopolitically. How much of an impact is what's happening in Russia, in China and other parts of the world going to impact our farmers and our agri companies in general?
Well, let's start with the Russia conflict because in terms of a commodity, let's look at grains and canola. It's had a huge impact on that. Input prices has been a big focal area as well. What are you seeing in terms of, no one's going to be able to predict what Vladimir Putin does, but are we going to see continuing challenges, I guess, in terms of supply coming out of the Black Sea?
Look, it's really interesting when you look almost exactly a year back at global grain prices, wheat particularly, but barley and canola. And if you pull up one of those charts, you'll see here approaching the end of December, we are almost back to where we were at the start of January. The global grain prices are high, but well below the peaks they went to when the market got really worried about whether grain could keep coming out of Russia and whether the world could keep getting exports, and everybody was rushing to buy as much as they could. The buyers are now reasonably confident that there might be some more shocks and volatility, but grain will keep flowing. So we've seen it go back to high levels rather than very high levels and much more flat than it used to be. And there's also a lot more grain in the world, less chance of northern hemisphere droughts than people thought they'd be. Your point on input prices is a very good one. We have seen some slowing down in terms of fertiliser price rises, but still we are seeing a lot of grain producers say, taking into consideration fertiliser prices, other inputs like fungicides and herbicides, that may have an impact on both what they grow in terms of crops next year and also on what the balance might be on a lot of mixed farms between grain and sheep.
Yeah, when it comes to that sort of exercise of deciding what you're going to plant next year, we did see a huge pile-on into canola. Do you think we'll see that pull back a bit next year?
We usually do. We normally see a lot of growers have a reasonable rotation. So you're absolutely right. We saw the pile-on into canola. Canola prices were absolutely terrific. And there's every chance we might see that come off slightly. And we may see a rotation perhaps back into barley as well. Barley had been one crop, particularly in South Australia, which had seen a decrease in acreage because more people had gone into canola and gone into wheat. So cyclically, it may be time that barley goes up again.
Yeah, it could be time for a Cinderella story for barley, but let's look at livestock. And when it comes to, let's start with beef. How are you seeing things, in not just in terms of domestic price, where we've had some crazy years in the positive sense in the last couple of seasons, but how are things looking on the export front?
Well, I think the export front's probably just about the biggest driver at the moment, and the export front will have its challenges in 2023. There are two big issues there. One is that the Chinese lockdowns are continuing to impact their consumers, so they're slowing down in their demand. The second point is what's happening in the US. In a nutshell, the US is going through a part of its cycle where it's killing a lot more cattle, because it's got a drought and because it's in that part of a cycle. There is a lot more US beef on their domestic market and world markets, so they don't need as much of our beef there as they did, and they're also trying to get as much as they can into our other two biggest markets, Japan and South Korea. So demand for Australian beef exports will be strong, but they will be challenged more in 2023 than they have been for a number of years.
And when it comes to that rebuild that's been underway, we keep hearing we're not quite yet at record levels, and we're probably still some way off that. But at what point do you suspect will we see it during next year that we reach a sort of level where farmers are going to start letting go of some volume, and we might see a bit of a downturn in the price?
Look, absolutely, and it's a fascinating one. The rebuild and the confidence and the restocking happened in a lot of Australia when the rains came after the drought. So 2020, 2021, prices shot up as there was green grass and everybody restocked. That confidence is arguably still there. The restockers are still building up their operations. They've done a lot of them so well at good cattle prices that they don't have to sell as many as they were. So the national herd's going up and the restocking's continuing. So as you say, the question is, when do we hit a top of the herd point, and when does that start to flatten out? That may well keep going well into next year. The big question mark is obviously every day in Australian ag we are a day closer to the next drought, even if that's years away. But for the time being, that confidence looks there. Prices are still good off the highs that they were. So likely that restocking might keep going for a little while yet.
Now, sheep prices, a bit like beef, not as stellar as the beef prices, but nonetheless, they've been pretty good over the last year, despite a pretty solid amount of supply around the place. How are you seeing things on the sheep front for next year?
Absolutely, and we continue to see this recovery in sheep numbers in Australia that we've been waiting for many years as well. Sheep numbers have gone from their super highs down to around 180 million, down to below 60 million, and they've been trending upwards for the last few years. That confidence remains strong in sheep meat. The question mark for 2023 will be what will be the impact of global economic downturns on the people who buy fine Australian woolen coats in Europe and fine Australian woolen suits in Asia and Europe and the US. We've seen those question marks impact the wool industry in the past, so that could flatten any strong price rises in the sheep industry. Things may stay good, but the potential for strong uplift could be somewhat flattened. The other big thing in sheep at the moment is because the flock is growing healthily, there are arguably more stock out there, or enough stock out there to keep the buyers happy. So that lack of tight supply means that strong upward price rises might be there for a while.
Yeah, and looking at wool, we've followed that market activity in the Australian Wool Exchange pretty closely. And look, the prices, again, are reasonable compared to the historical average, but nonetheless, they've had a pretty rocky road towards the end of this year, partly because of those lockdowns in China you've mentioned.
Yeah, look, they have, but I suppose the wool industry has also changed over decades, and a lot of people in ag have been watching wool very closely for decades. And we know that the wool side of the sheep industry really declined in percentage over years. So you could argue that those people who are still producing wool out there, or who still have it as a major part of their overall operation, are well used to this kind of thing. By and large, run efficient operations. They know how to get through these cycles. So they've seen this before. They've got great confidence. They're probably continuing to get a finer grade of wool as well. And so for them, this will be a bump in the road, but not necessarily a major one.
One of those bumps, or maybe a pothole, there's plenty of those around in the roads, is this availability of labour when it comes to shearing, from what we're hearing around the districts as well. How do you see the labour shortage just more broadly across agriculture feeding into producers, and how they might go next year?
Look, you're absolutely right. Labour shortage across the board is a growing issue, and it's arguably going to be a bigger one this year in any areas that had their crops affected by rain, because a lot of them will be harvesting later than they would have. That'll mean that the national harvest is in a shorter period, and all that labour that's often needed to harvest at receival centres, perhaps by contractors as well, that could make that challenging. So it is absolutely growing as a challenge, and we're definitely hearing those shearing stories, and that is making a number of wool growers either change their shearing patterns, or even for them look at what their mix on their operations between sheep, cattle and grain will be going forward.
Well, I guess as we sort of wrap up the chat and looking at, going into Christmas, there are going to be some, particularly in the grains sector, that are going to be very active farmers over the Christmas period when usually they'd be done or close to done by Christmas. It is testament to the hard work of our farmers and their resilience, as you've said. A lot of them are used to the ups and downs of living on the land.
Ricky, it's a fascinating one. I know on Christmas Day I will be driving 4 hours west, and every year when I do that, I never ceases to amaze me the number of headers that are out that day because they know it's part of the industry. They know they need to do it, and it's something that everybody in agriculture gets used to. But hey, it's a more exciting industry than it's ever been. That global demand for our food and the supply of it, Australia's food, is stronger than it's ever been, and that's going to remain strong. So, yep, challenges, but remains a good industry to be in.
Well, Michael Whitehead, the head of Agribusiness Insights at ANZ, thanks so much for joining us. You have a great Christmas. We'll catch you in the new year.
You too. Thanks very much, Ricky.